Imagine this. You've got a young spiritual community built on shared ideals, right? But then, boom, it faces this huge challenge from within, division. How do the rules, the very structure of the group, actually come out of moments like that? That's what we're diving into today.
Exactly. We're looking deep into a specific ancient monastic text. It's called SAİGHÀDISESA.
Right? And this isn't just some dry historical record. It's like a window opening onto a real crisis point for the early Buddhists.
Yeah, a pivotal moment. Our goal here, our mission, you could say, is to pull out the key lessons, not just about the specific rule they made, but about how communities hold together, how they deal with dissent.
Principles that are still relevant, I think. So the scene is set in ancient India, Rajagaha, Vidyavana Kalanda Kanivapa. That's where the Buddha was staying.
A well-known spot in the texts.
And the focus is on this one figure, Devadatta, and, well, his pretty controversial actions.
Controversial is putting it mildly, perhaps.
So let's get right into it. Devadatta, he makes this direct attempt to cause what the texts call a Saṅghādisesa, a schism.
A split in the community, and also a kakapeta, which is like breaking the wheel, the harmony of the group.
It wasn't subtle. This was a head-on challenge.
Definitely. And you can imagine the other monks, the bhikkhus, they weren't happy.
No, they reacted immediately. They called him a Tamavadi, basically saying he wasn't speaking according to the Dhamma, the teachings.
And Avinayavadi not following the Vinaya, the monastic code. They saw it as undermining everything.
Okay, but here's where it gets really, really interesting. Devadatta wasn't alone. He had supporters.
Yes, the texts even named them. Kokoriko, Kamurakati-sako, and this other figure, Kantadevya Puto Samudato.
And their defense, it wasn't just quiet agreement. They actually stood up and said, no, Devadatta does speak Dhamma and Vinaya.
It's quite audacious, really. They said, Amhakanika Devadatta Chandanya Karuchinyaka Odadhyavoharati, meaning Devadatta speaks, taking our wish and our preference. He knows what he's talking about. And, we're okay with this. It's agreeable to us.
Wow. So they're explicitly saying he speaks for us and we like it.
Precisely. Now think about the impact of that on a community that's still finding its feet. Internal dissent is one thing, but this is explicit support for someone trying to break the whole thing apart.
It really strikes at the trust, doesn't it? The foundation.
Absolutely. How do you handle that? When members of your own group are actively siding with someone trying to cause a schism, that's the core challenge they faced.
So what happened next? The concerned monks, the ones who saw this as a threat.
They did what you'd expect in that structure. They went straight to the Buddha.
They reported everything. Devadatta's actions and what his supporters were saying.
Yes, the whole situation. His attempted schism and the declaration of support from Kokoliko and the others.
And the Buddha's reaction.
It was strong. He referred to these supporters as Mokkha-purisa.
Foolish persons.
Foolish persons, empty men, essentially.
Right.
He condemned them for backing someone who was actively trying to fracture the Sangha.
So this leads directly to the rule itself, then.
It does. And understanding the why is crucial. It wasn't just about punishment. It was really about prevention, protecting the unity.
Preventing discord, keeping the community harmonious.
Exactly. The Buddha pointed out that this kind of division undermines the faith of outsiders and even shakes the confidence of those already within the community. So the rule was aimed at preserving that harmony, that integrity.
Makes sense. Protecting the collective purpose, you could say.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so let's unpack this rule, this Saṅghādisesa that came out of this whole Devadatta episode. This is Saṅghādisesa 11.
Right. So the rule sets out a specific scenario. You have a bhikkhu, a monk, who is actively trying to break the Sangha.
The instigator, like Devadatta.
Correct. And then you have 1, 2, or maybe 3 other bhikkhus who act as his anuvataka.
Followers. People who agree with his views.
Yes. Followers of his views and preferences, and also as Bhagavadgika.
Which means?
Speakers on his side.
Oh.
People who actively voice support for him, maybe even praise him or his divisive agenda.
Okay, so you have the schismatic and his vocal supporters. What happens then, according to the rule?
Well, other monks, the ones who see this or hear about it, they have a duty to step in.
They can't just ignore it.
No. They are required to admonish these supporters directly, and the text even gives the specific words they should use.
What did they have to say?
Something like, "Venerable sirs, you shouldn't say such things. This bhikkhu, the one you're supporting, he doesn't speak according to Dhamma or Vinaya. Please don't favor a schism in the Sangha. You should reconcile with the Sangha, because a united Sangha, living in harmony, without disputes, focused on one purpose,
Hmm.
That's how we dwell happily.
Wow, that's very direct, addressing the danger to the community directly.
Very direct. And notice, it's an appeal to unity and reconciliation. But here's a key procedural point. This warning wasn't just a one-shot deal. It had to be given clearly and repeated up to 3 times.
3 times. So they really gave him a chance to back down.
Absolutely. The phrase is "Devadatta samanubhāsanā." They should be admonished up to the 3rd time. It really emphasizes dialogue and the opportunity for correction before things escalate.
But what if they didn't back down? If after 3 warnings, these supporters just dug in their heels?
Right. If, after being formally admonished like that 3 times, they still refuse to stop supporting this schismatic Saṅghādisesa, then they incurred a SAµghādisesa offense.
And that's a serious one, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Saṅghādisesa offenses are a major category, requiring formal processes within the Sangha for the monk's rehabilitation. It's not taken lightly.
Just to be clear on those terms again, Anavattaka is really about sharing the schismatics' whole view, their preferences.
Yes, a deep alignment, holding the same beliefs, same perspective on the matter.
And Bhagavata is the active part, speaking out for them.
Exactly. Standing on their side, being their voice, perhaps defending them or promoting their cause. It's the outward action of support.
Okay. Now, were there other, maybe lesser consequences related to this?
Yes, interestingly. The law also considered inaction. If other monks knew about this support for the schismatic, but didn't speak up, didn't deliver that initial admonition.
They just stayed silent.
Right. If they heard about it and did nothing, they themselves committed a dukkaṭa.
Which is a minor offense.
A minor offense, yes. But it shows that there was an expectation for members to actively uphold the community's integrity. Silence wasn't acceptable when facing division.
So even the informal warnings carried weight. What if those failed, though? What was the next step?
If the informal individual admonitions didn't work, the process could escalate. The supporters could be brought Saṅghā
Into the middle of the Sangha.
Yeah.
Like the full assembly of monks.
Exactly. Right into the formal gathering. And they'd be warned again there. Now, if they still persisted, even after being warned in the assembly, at that point, it was still considered a dukkaṭa.
Still only a minor offense at that stage.
Yes, before the formal act of admonition begins.
Ah, okay. So there's another level, the formal samanubhāsanā.
Correct. This is the official formal admonition process. And it couldn't just be initiated by anyone. It required a vyatena bhikkhuna paibalena.
A competent, capable, respected monk.
Precisely. Someone with a standing and skill to handle such a serious matter properly. This designated monk would then make a formal motion, a ñāti, to the Sangha.
Like proposing an action to the assembly.
Exactly. And this formal process involved what's called a kammavaka, basically, a formal statement or act proclaimed to the Sangha.
How did that work?
It was typically a 3-part declaration. The competent monk would first state the motion, the ñāti, explaining that certain individuals, naming them, are supporting a schismatic, have been warned, refused to stop, and therefore the Sangha is now formally admonishing them.
And then?
Then that statement is repeated twice more. So the core message is delivered 3 times to the entire assembly. This ensures everyone hears it, understands it, and it allows for objections. If no one objects after the 3rd repetition, the Sangha is considered to have approved the formal admonition.
Wow, that's incredibly detailed, very procedural.
Very. It shows a commitment to due process, even thousands of years ago. Transparency and collective agreement were clearly important.
And this formal process, it had its own set of escalating penalties tied to it, right?
It did. And this is where it gets quite specific, almost legalistic.
Okay, break it down for us.
Right. So when the competent monk made the initial declaration, the ñāti, if the supporters still didn't desist, they incurred a dukkaṭa right there.
Minor offense again.
Minor offense. Then, after the first 2 repetitions of the formal statement, the kammavaka, if they still hadn't stopped, the offense level increased to dukkaṭa.
Which is more serious than dukkaṭa.
Yes, a grave offense, often considered just below Saṅghādisesa.
And then finally,
at the very end of the 3rd formal statement, kammavaka pariyosani, if the supporters still refused to desist, that's when they incurred the full Saṅghādisesa offense.
So it's a gradual ramp up, even within the formal procedure.
Exactly. A graduated response giving them every possible chance to reconsider, right up to the very last moment. And importantly, if they did end up incurring the Saṅghādisesa, the previous dukkaṭa and tulakaya related to that specific formal process were considered resolved or absorbed into the final, more serious offense.
Got it. And you mentioned something about a limit on how many could be admonished together.
Yes, a practical point. The text says, Duetayo ekato samanubhāsitava, tadutarina samanubhāsitava. Meaning, 2 or 3 monks could be admonished together in one formal procedure, but not more than that.
Why do you think that was?
Likely for manageability. Dealing with more than 3 individuals in such a formal, serious proceeding within the assembly could become chaotic or unwieldy. It keeps the focus clear.
Makes sense. Okay, so this brings us to the conditions under which the supporters actually were liable for these offenses. It seems quite nuanced.
It is. The liability, especially for the most serious offense, the Saṅghādisesa, depended quite a bit on the supporter's state of mind and whether the Saṅgha itself was following the rules correctly.
How so?
Well, a supporter incurred the Saṅghādisesa if the Saṅgha's formal admonition process was actually valid, a Dhammakamma, and the supporter knew it was valid, or was doubtful about its validity, or even mistakenly thought it was invalid, but still refused to desist.
So basically, if the Saṅgha did everything right, the supporters' persistence led to Saṅghādisesa, regardless of their personal opinion about the process.
Pretty much, yes. If the Saṅgha followed the procedure correctly, defiance meant Saṅghādisa.
But what if the Saṅgha didn't follow the procedure correctly? What if the formal admonition itself was flawed? And a Dhammakamma?
That changes things. In that case, if the Saṅgha's action was invalid, then the supporter's persistence only resulted in a dukkaṭa, the minor offense. This applied whether they mistakenly thought the invalid action was valid, were doubtful, or correctly knew it was invalid.
That's crucial. It puts a check on the Saṅgha, too. They have to follow their own rules for the most serious penalty to apply.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of procedural correctness on the part of the community authorities.
Okay, and finally, there were exemptions, right? Cases where someone was not liable for this offense at all, the anapati.
Yes, there were clear exemptions.
Who was exempt?
Well, obviously, anyone who wasn't actually subjected to the formal admonition process, samanubhāsanā, and very importantly, anyone who did stop supporting the schismatic during the process, paidin. If they desisted, the offense didn't apply or ceased.
So reconciliation was always the goal.
Always. Also exempt were those considered not fully responsible for their actions, the insane umattakani, those whose minds were seriously distracted, citta-cittana, or those overcome by severe physical pain, vadanane.
That shows a degree of compassion, or at least practicality.
I think so. It acknowledges limitations in culpability. And interestingly, the adhikammika is also listed as exempt.
The first offender, who does that refer to?
In the context of this specific rule's origin story, it refers to Devadatta himself. He, as the instigator of the schism, wasn't subject to this particular rule designed for his supporters. He would face consequences under other rules related to causing schism directly.
Okay. So this rule was specifically about dealing with those who followed or supported the person trying to break the Saṅgha.
Precisely. It really raises an important point, doesn't it? About the blend of legal procedure, pragmatism, and even compassion within this ancient monastic code. The focus seems very much on correcting behavior and preserving the group, not just on, rigid punishment.
Absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, it's just striking how this rule, the Viddhamataka Saṅghādisesa, wasn't some abstract idea. It came directly from a real-world, high-stakes challenge to the community's survival.
Yeah, born from experience. A very practical response, meticulously worked out to handle a dangerous internal threat, the threat of active support for division.
And the lessons seem so broad, don't they? For any group, really.
I really think so. That need for clear communication, for having agreed upon ways to handle dissent, and maybe above all, protecting that shared purpose, that collective identity. It's fundamental.
Yeah, maintaining cohesion when things get rough internally.
That's the constant balancing act.
So maybe the thought to leave everyone with is this. How do our modern communities, whether it's online groups, workplaces, social movements, whatever, how do we handle that same tension? Balancing the need for everyone to pull together with allowing individual expression, especially when, inevitably, divisive figures or viewpoints emerge.
It's the timeless question, isn't it? How to navigate conflict and maintain unity. This ancient text gives us one fascinating, detailed blueprint for how one community tried to do it.
A lot to think about there.